Ladies and gentlemen, to invite somebody. She's the CEO and managing partner of Wakiaga and Company Advocates. Wakiaga. Yes, see, the way I wanted for somebody to talk. Thank you. Rudia tena, nilijua tu ndio utaongea wa kwanza. I know you. Mimi nakuchokozana nikiwa hapa. Rudia tena. Rudia tena. Thank you, advocate. Thank you so much. Namchokozana. I know how kumchokoza and he reacts. Thank you so much. Company Advocates, where she leads a senior legal and strategic advisory practice operating at the intersection of law, governance, policy, economic transformation. She is widely recognized as a leading voice in industrial policy, private sector development, and institutional reform in Africa. An advocate of the High Court of Kenya, she holds an MBA as Master of Degree in International Trade and Investment Law. And she's currently doing a PhD. Wakati wako na degree, mkono. Degree yako. Kama MC. Watu yako sio kwa degree yako. Watu wa degree. Watu wa masters, sisi tuko hapa. Masters ndio sisi. Thank you. I have masters in communication and master of ceremony. Sikusomea nilipatana nayo. She's currently a PhD candidate in leadership and governance. Academic grounding complements more than 2 decades of experience advising government boards and institutions on complex regulatory and economic and governance matters. Before this role, she's held senior leadership and advisory roles across private sector and international policy institutions. She's previously served as a senior advisory and global lead by industry and commercial at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, supporting governments across Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East on industrial strategy, business-enabled reforms, and sectors development in areas such as tourism, life science, digital economy, and critical raw materials. Please, kama umetoka Africa, sema I. Kama umetoka Africa, sema I. Kama umetoka Kenya tu, kama umekuwa tu Kenya, clap once, God loves you. Early, she served as a CEO and secretary at the board of Kenya Association of Manufacturers, where she led national and regional policy advisory, manufacturing sectors expansions, and structured policy private engagement. She's also previously working as a manager for the government and industrial affairs in Kenya Airways. Oh my God. Hapa ndio nataka sasa mfocus. This is the last thing I have. She has to come because she has gone. My God. Nalegi umesoma tu mpaka form. Na unaendelea vizuri. She's a highly respected board member and governance expert with extensive experience across regulated and strategic sector. Her past board roles include Chair of the UN Global Compact Network, Kenya. Sasa hii nikisema chair una clap. So we together. Chair, nisaidie tafadhali. Nasema kwanza, Chair of the UN Global Compact Network, Kenya. Chair of the Kenya Road Board. Chair, and board member of Kenya. Chair. Hapa nikisema Kenya unasema power. Kenya. Thank you so much. And she's currently serves on several boards, including the Institute of Economic Affairs, IEA, the International Center of Research on Women in African Board, and I&M Bank, among others. Because I don't want to talk a lot, and this is the last part because I would love so much, ladies and gentlemen, mujue ni nani. She has a lot of awards, and the last part, ndio mjue, I'll feel so much akiwa hapa. And DJ nicheze tu wimbo because already she knows herself. Ladies and gentlemen, help me to introduce Ms. Phyllis anapokuja hapa atuambie this very important part. Wapi makofi tupige vizuri. Thank you. So before I finish, there's a very important part because I would love, she can say, there's a very important part here. The contributions that you have done. Ladies and gentlemen, at least wasikie tu hapa ndio mtu anasikia vizuri ukijisemea wewe mwenyewe haka ka segment ka mwisho. Inafanya. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. No, marketers have energy. Good evening.
Good evening.
I don't know if the mic is working.
Oh, no,
you can hear me? Okay, thank you so much. And it's lovely to see all of you. I don't know what MC wants me to read. He was the one supposed to introduce me. Yeah, but anyway, I'll just read for him. But it says her contributions to leadership, policy, and economic development have been recognized globally. She has been named the Choice 200 Africa Economic Leaders for Tomorrow, 2018-2022. The most influential, on the list of the most influential people of African descent, top 40 under 40 communicators. Nimalize hapo.
Kuna key nilikuwa nataka useme mwenyewe.
Gani hiyo?
Top
40 under 40. Hizo siku nilikuwa under 40. Nilikuwa under 40. Sasa hivi niko under 30.
Mungu ni nani?
There we go.
Ladies and gentlemen,
thank you.
Thank
you so much, everyone. And it's lovely to see all of you. I hope you've had a beautiful week. I thought I would come early so that I say hi to everyone. But because I didn't manage, can you give your neighbor a high five on my behalf? A high five, and then tell them Phyllis says hello. Asante sana. Allow me to appreciate Nairobi Hospital for hosting us, Felix and his team. It's nice to be in Nairobi Hospital for something other than an injection, for a change. I'm one of those people who fear injections. I remember when I was young and I was sick and would have to go to either Gertrude or Nairobi Hospital, I would have like 5 nurses hold me down before I get an injection. And I'm still there, I don't take injections. So it's nice to be here for a change. Colombo, thanks for bringing us for something other than injections, and for Nairobi Hospital for hosting us. I want to recognize my learned friend. There's a learned friend of mine in the room, I heard. Thanks a lot, Roy. Thanks a lot. Any other learned friends? We recognize lawyers. Before now, I become a marketer again, and I'll tell you how I'm a marketer. The lawyers in the room, we recognize you. I want to appreciate Marketing Africa, Colombo and his team. So Colombo has been trying to get me to come and speak, and the last time we tried doing it, we did a recording. But he decided he would rather not air the recording and wait for me to come physically. So I'm really, really privileged to be here with you today. And he's asked me to speak about an interesting topic as I get into it. And it's about how we move from policy to profit. And a lot of the work I've done, as you heard, was in the policy space and has been in the policy space for the last almost 20 or 21 years. And it's always lovely to speak about policy. The only challenge I have, it's a Friday evening. So I don't know why we marketers, Colombo, you'll tell us, why marketers want to listen to difficult topics on a Friday evening. So what I'll try and do is to simplify, to make it short and sweet, so that we can engage more, have dinner, and do other fun things. I need to be told how the slides are moving, but yeah, you can move them for me. So that's my profile that you see right there. I think we've already covered that. We can move to the next slide, which is the firm. The one before that, which is the firm profile. So as you heard, I'm an advocate. I run a practice called Wakiaga Company Advocates. So if you're in trouble, myself and the lawyer in the room, do tell us, and we'll be happy to help you in one way or another. And the law firm is branded. So I put this one here intentionally, because you're marketers, so you'll understand where I'm coming from when I brand the law firm. So the law firm works on law, on governance, policy, and economic transformation. And then the next thing is my brand. If you move to the next slide, I think the marketers will get it. Thank you. So this was done by an amazing young marketer who's called Glenn. When I told him about what I want to do and we brainstormed together, this is how we came up with the logo. So it comes from African philosophy, specifically from Ghana, called Chim Chim. And it's a symbol that represents resilience, adaptability, and the ability to navigate life's winding paths. And for me, I chose that because today in the legal environment or the environment we work in, there's a lot of change. I think if you're in a sector, you see changes in regulations, in policy, and progress is not linear. So effective counsel must really be very adaptable. So you can't be rigid in this world. So that's what underpins how we work. We work with people to offer clarity where there's complexity, and we anchor institutions while enabling adaptation and also applying law as a tool for sound judgment. So the practice areas we cover, we work on core legal practice areas, strategic advisory, thought leadership, and policy engagement. So I'll just quickly go through the slides so we can come to the fun part where we are learning more about trade policy. So for core legal practice, those are some of the areas that we cover, all the way from commercial law, property and conveyancing, employment. If you're having issues with your employers, do reach out, regulatory issues, international trade, and all that. Then the second area we cover is strategic advisory practice. And in this area, we cover issues around commercial and transaction advisory, regulatory public law, governance and board advisory, ESG, and sustainability. Then the third area we cover is thought leadership and policy engagement. So under the law firm, we have a thought leadership platform called the Center for Policy Dialogue. And that's where we do our thought leadership, convenings, conversations. So yeah, you'll be seeing more about that in the near future. So please look out for that. But I'll move to today's session. As I said, I'm going to try and keep it short and sweet. I will be covering the following areas. That's what the session overview is about. So we'll start first by reframing the conversation around trade policy and why it's relevant for marketers and those of us in the room. And then I'll give you some insights on the strategic context of why it's important that we think about trade policy in the work that we do. Then I'll talk about some 5 strategic shifts that are happening or that we need to make if we're going to be competitive. I'll speak a little bit to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area because I think it's a game changer. And as we move into this season for marketers like us, that's I think very important. And then just an action framework at the end. What next for all of us? So that's what the session will cover. And just to mention, I had a stint in a marketing department. When I did my first job at Kenya Airways, is there anyone from KQ in the room? Yes, when I worked in KQ, I was part of the marketing department, my first job in corporate. So in the marketing department, we had a department called Customer Relations Team. It was a team of 4 people, and we used to handle customer feedback and then use the feedback on business process improvement. So feedback would influence how we improve the business in KQ. So I'm one of you. So as I speak as a marketer. So I'm happy to be here. So before we go into the serious things, I want us to do a fun exercise. Hopefully, by the time we are done with this and we get into the session and we start to reframe the conversation, we'll all be aligned. So the first question, I'll ask a question, and what I want us to do, if that statement applies to you in any way, please stand up. And once you stand up, you stay standing. So if I ask the next statement, if it applies to someone who's sitting down, they stand, but if you're standing, keep standing, okay? So I'll start with the first one. Stand up if regulation, taxes, or import duties have affected your pricing in the last 24 months. If anything around regulations, taxes, import duties have affected your pricing. Thank you. Hey, you guys are lucky. All those things have not affected the pricing of your products or services. Regulations, taxes, or import duty. Yeah, you see the numbers are increasing. Just check your tax bill. Anyway, okay, let's look around. Yeah, stay standing. Then the second one, if you have delayed entering a new market because of licensing, regulatory approvals, or compliance complexities. If you have a product where you work, a service, but you've delayed entering the market. Yeah, there are more. Okay, good. Because of licensing, regulatory approvals, or any compliance complexities. Okay, thank you. Keep standing. Then the next one, if your product standards or labeling rules or sustainability requirements in the market or ESG, which is an economic, social, and governance compliance, have forced you to change either your packaging in your business, where you source your products from, or your messaging. If ESG, are you now speaking more about ESG, for example? Are you talking about sustainability in your organization? So if that has happened, please stand up. Okay. And then another one, stand up if data regulations, fintech rules, telecom restrictions, or digital compliance requirements have affected how you operate. Anything around digital compliance, this data. See, nowadays we have data. You've been seeing people being fined, but they don't forward messages to people. People are being fined every day. So if you've been affected in any way by digital compliance, telecom, fintech, data, thank you. The room, it's increasing. And then the next one, stand up if customs delays, exchange rate policy, or sourcing restrictions have impacted your cost structure in any way. Okay, that's fine. And the last one, I want you to stand for this one. If marketing was expected to fix the growth problem, even though the constraint was regulatory. If marketing in your company is expected to fix all those problems I talked about, yet you know it's around trade policy. Okay, that's fine. So what I want to speak about today is trade policy, and that's why you're all standing. For those of you who are standing, and for those of you who are standing in your hearts, but you didn't stand up. Because trade policy is not something that happens somewhere far away. It's something that is happening every day, and it's influencing how you price your products, how you package your products, your expansion, your digital strategy, and everything. Thanks, Esther. I can see Esther has walked in. Esther, I just want to confirm we've gotten a lot of Safaricom credit. So we appreciate you. Okay? So you can sit down now, but that's why we're here today, to talk about trade policy. And I want to just frame that conversation for you. And sometimes this is the marketing blind spot. We focus a lot on demand campaigns, on positioning, on channel storytelling, but we rarely examine the structure that's shaping this demand. So I want to talk about what this structure is, because the structure is really shaped by trade rules, and I want to just demonstrate why trade policy that I was asked to speak about to marketers is not a government topic, it's actually a growth topic for your business. So I'll speak to what trade policy is in a simple way for a Friday evening. Trade policy is basically the framework of the laws, the agreements, the regulations, and the standards that govern how goods and services, capital, and even data move across border. So it's not just, sometimes we think it's just because products going across the border. It includes services, because that's trade and services, and that also includes capital and data and other things. And what trade policy does, it determines who can sell, it determines where they can sell, it determines under which conditions they sell, at what cost, and with what restrictions. So traditionally, we would think of trade policy as tariffs. You get to the border to one of our neighboring countries and there's a tariff there. But it's more than that, because it governs everything from digital payments to financial licensing to sustainability standards, intellectual property, and even cross-border capital flows. So it's not just about containers, it's about cloud servers, it's about fintech, It's about scale, it's about telecom and interoperability, and about how you expand your brand in the continent. So for me, that's why I'm doing a strategic reframing, because if marketing is about creating demand, trade policy helps us to define the conditions under which this demand can be served. So it's not open-ended. You want to go into the market, but you have restrictions, or you have a framework, which is really trade policy. And it affects those things. It affects your cost structure, it affects your scalability, it affects your market access, your brand legitimacy, even your pricing flexibility and regulatory risk. So that's why it's important that we reframe that conversation and realize that trade policy is market architecture, and as marketers, if we ignore it, you eventually hit a ceiling. So it's important that we are aware about trade policy. So next, I'll speak about the strategic context. There are many things, of course, that are happening structurally, globally, and everywhere around us, but I picked 3 of them that I think are relevant to the topic today. So I'll speak to those items. Okay, stop to moving. Okay, there we go. So the first one, and the first structural change that is happening, is that continental integration is happening through a layered trade architecture. So as you think of us as a country, Africa is moving gradually towards continental integration, but for Kenya, it's not just one agreement, and for many African countries, it's very layered, and that's what we see there. So we have the EAC, which is our immediate regional market, and we have a customs union there. So we have a common external tariff, which is the tax on goods in that area. And then we have the next market level, which is COMESA, the common market for East and Southern Africa, which is a common market. So our goods can move freely within that region. Then we actually have something that brings together EAC, COMESA, and SADC called the Tripartite Free Trade Area, which I didn't even put there, but it's also another layer. At continental level, we have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, and I'll speak more to that a bit later. And in addition to that, we still have global agreements, like the Economic Partnership Agreement with the EU, the Economic Partnership Agreement with the UK, the Africa Growth and Opportunities Act, amongst many others. So that means that as Kenyan firms, as we operate in one market, we are actually not using one market architecture. There are several and they're operating simultaneously. So that means that we need to be aware of them. And what it is practically is, for example, the East African community shapes our neighborhood expansion of both our trade in goods and services into the region of East Africa. So there are how many countries in East Africa? This one will give credit if you tell me. How many countries are in East Africa? Or who can name them? You don't even have to tell me. Someone, countries in East Africa, yes? Yes? Yes. Yes, exactly. DRC is a recent new member, and Uganda. So those are the countries in the East African neighborhood. So when you're going to expand into those markets, you have to be cognizant of the trade rules within the EAC, which are looked after by the EAC Secretariat in Arusha. And then the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, I think all of us have been hearing about it, and it was rolled out, and there's a lot of work going in finalizing the rules and everything around it. What it wants to do is to progressively reduce tariffs, to liberalize services and harmonize standards across the continent. And then agreements like the EU EPA, the Africa Growth and Opportunities Act, which I think we had was pulled out because of His Excellency Trump in America, and then it came back for a year until December. So there's a lot of uncertainty for those of us who export to the US. So those international agreements determine how competitive you are in global markets, but they are quite strict in terms of the rules of origin and also their compliance standards. And why does this matter for marketers? When we talk about integration, we are not talking about one door opening. We're actually talking, as I said, about those multiple structures. And what these frameworks do, they influence where you manufacture your product, how you source your product or your service, how you price it, where you can expand your business to, and how you structure compliance, because the compliance agreements within those agreements also exist. So that's what they do. And for, say, FMCG firms, it actually affects the input costs of our products and the regional distribution. For services companies, maybe like banks and telcos, it affects your licensing, your capital movement, your digital scalability. For companies that are in tourism, it affects how you move even tourists across borders, the issues around free movement of people and everything. So at the end of the day, these agreements are not symbolic, they are structural, and they are layers, they are very layered, and they reshape our competitive landscapes. So as brands, if we take time to understand that architecture, we design how we enter the market and how we perform very differently. So I'll move to the second structural shift that's happening. So we've talked about continental, we have the sustainability, and then we'll talk about digital trade. So the second one is that regulatory convergence around sustainability. And when I talked about sustainability and who's having to respond to that, I saw a number of us stand up. But what is happening is really sustainability is no longer just a brand story. It's not just good to do anymore. It's actually becoming a trade rule. We are seeing a lot of the global markets, especially the EU market, the UK market, and parts of the Asian market. They're actually putting sustainability into their market access requirements. So they have things like ESG disclosure obligations, where you have to disclose as a business, what are you doing around ESG? They have carbon reporting frameworks in place. They have deforestation regulations, where for certain products, you have to demonstrate what you're doing around the environment, especially from a deforestation angle. They also have traceability requirements across supply chains and responsible sourcing standards. So they're not optional branding guidelines anymore. They're actually compliance conditions that you're expected to adhere to so that you're able to export your products and even access financing. Because a lot of banks, I don't know if there are banks in the room nowadays. Any bankers in the room? Okay. So for a lot of banks now, they are actually having lines like a green credit line where they give you competitive access to credit if you're meeting some of these standards. So basically what that means, and just trying to make it a bit concrete, if for example you're exporting horticultural products to Europe, traceability is not a marketing angle only. It's actually a compliance angle that you need to be sensitive to. If for example you're manufacturing textiles under AGOA or under the Economic Partnership Agreement, you have to be very sensitive about issues of sustainability, because they start looking about things like your water usage, because manufacturing of textile uses a lot of water. How efficient are you? Are you recycling that water? Do you have effluent waste treatment plants and things like that? They start going down to even labor standards. How do you treat your employees? Are they working overtime? Are you paying them fairly? Do they have even basic things? Are you providing meals? And that becomes a market differentiator. It can actually deny you access to markets. It can give you access to niche markets who actually recognize this as important things. So that's why this is very critical in terms of a structural shift. And if you want to access some of the global capital markets, things like your ESG ratings are also influencing investor decisions, as I said. So that basically means that sustainability is now embedded in trade agreements. It's put in supply chain audits when firms are being audited, in investment frameworks, and even procurement standards. Most importantly, it's a cost structure decision because it does introduce some costs, but can also bring down cost for you as a business over time, because it has been found these practices eventually do bring down the cost of doing business. So carbon reporting, for example, can change your production processes. Traceability requires you, for example, to digitize your equipment so that you're able to actually trace your products. You need procurement strategies and things like that. So firms that treat this as a strategic positioning will be able to convert it into a compliance premium. And when we come to the 5 things we could do and the shifts we could do as marketers, we'll see some of that. Then the third change there is the digital trade and services liberalization, which is a structural shift. And I think it's one of the most disruptive ones out of the ones there on the board. Because as I say, trade policy for many years was built around just goods and physical products crossing physical borders. But today, there's a lot of things moving invisibly. You don't even see it moving. And those are things in services sector. Digital payments, for example, are moving across borders. We are getting money moving across borders. We are having cross-border fintech, cloud infrastructure, streaming platforms, e-commerce, AI-enabled services. So this is like an entire shift that has happened in the last decade or two. And unlike goods, which you can see, digital services are scaling instantly if regulations allow them to. And they scale positively. And there was a joke earlier about TikTok. We can discuss that one over dinner. But the real battleground is no longer customs clearance, because before you would go to the border, then the customs officer would check. But now the real battleground is things around data governance. As a country, how are you governing data? How are you ensuring that you protect people's data? The issues around cross-border data transfer rules. When data moves across borders, what are the rules there? Cybersecurity standards. Digital taxation, which is a big conversation. Should we tax us who have social media accounts? Because it's becoming a lot of revenue and a lot of business is happening on those platforms. The issue of platform regulation, there we go again. And the issue of payment systems and how they can be interoperability of those payment systems. So that's the thing. So if we don't have data moving, you can't scale your services. So the frameworks have to consider that. If you have digital taxation divergences, what can happen is your platform margins can compress, and over time, government might think they're collecting more, but effectively what happens, the people making money out of those platforms don't have purchasing power. At the end of the day, government collects less. So it's really a conversation of how we balance all this and determine how we move forward. So I think for Kenya, we are in a strategic place because we've built strong digital capabilities. Safaricom is luckily in the room and a big sponsor of this. So we have mobile money leadership. We have a lot of fintech innovation happening. We have growing tech startups. And as we scale beyond our national borders as businesses, we need to be sensitive to those regulatory recognitions, the data transfer agreements, the harmonized digital standards, and other things. So trade policy, as you've seen, is no longer about just containers at the port. It's about services, it's about software, it's about systems. And it's going to govern the movement of data, the movement of digital capital, the recognition of your digital licenses, and how digital infrastructure operates across borders. So for all of us in the room, whether we're in a bank, a telco, a digital company, a services company, I just want to emphasize that in this next decade, the companies that understand digital trade architecture will scale regionally. And those companies that ignore it will remain as national companies, and they'll be constrained even at a regional level. So that third trend, as I've said, is not just a technology problem. It's actually a trade policy problem, and something that as marketers, we should be observing and planning around. So I'll speak to the 5 strategic shifts. And the first shift as marketers, we are looking at how we move from compliance to competitive signaling. So from compliance, thinking of compliance as a cost, because a lot of the times you think compliance of what? Now you guys want me to put solar panels, or you want me to do energy audits, or you want me to ban plastics. But it's no longer a compliance cost issue. It's actually a competitive signaling. A lot of times I think we underestimated how much regulatory credibility shaped your brand trust, especially in emerging markets where people are still trying to figure out your product. So if you utilize compliance, it's actually something that can signal your maturity in the market. So, for example, what compliance can communicate? If you're an FMCG and you have food safety certification and you're entering a market, it demonstrates that you're a reliable brand and people are more likely to take up your product. If you have sustainability standards, it signals that you're a responsible organization that's looking out for the world and the greater good. If you have traceability, where your products can be traced all the way back from even the farm, it signals that you're being transparent, you're hiding nothing. For people in the banking sector, things like prudential compliance demonstrate stability. When they have AML, KYC, that's anti-money laundering rules, and know your customer, it signals that you're serious as an institution to what's happening globally. For companies like in telco, if they have regulatory alignment, they are working with regulators, it signals that they have long-term legitimacy. So basically what compliance does, it reduces perceived risk for your companies, and it actually builds trust. So that, I think, is something for all of us that is very important. So I'll give an example. In the flower sector, there's a certification called Global GAP. I don't know if there's anyone in horticulture or the flower sector, but this is a certification that is internationally recognized, and it stands for good agricultural practices. So it just basically demonstrates that if you trace back where these flowers came from or the horticulture, they had good practices in terms of at farm level, how they planted the product, how they treated their employees and everything. So for Kenyan flowers that go to the EU, one of the things that a lot of players have to get to stand out in the market is that Global GAP certification. Because for them, it is a requirement, but it also signals to the market that they are operating under international quality standards, they're responsible for the environment, they have supply chain traceability, and it signals that they can access premium retailers. So when you have that brand, you can get into the premium stores in the EU. You can have higher prices. You can secure those long-term contracts where you have offtake agreements with those stores. So certification then becomes a pricing power, and you're using it otherwise to build your margin. So it applies even beyond agriculture. If you're a fintech, for example, and you're licensed under a harmonized cross-border framework, it shows that you're robust. If you're a telco who has interoperability signals, it demonstrates that you're ready to integrate within the continent. So these start to become brand assets, actually. So these are no longer compliance documents in a drawer somewhere. They're actually brand assets that we can utilize. I know for a lot of us, you've not even seen those documents sometimes, because as lawyers, we probably hide them in the drawer in the legal department. But I want to challenge us that our upgrade as we leave this session today is to see how we can translate this regulatory credibility into brand authority, especially in markets where trust is fragile. And that way we are starting to shift from compliance as an obligation to compliance as a competitive signal. So that's the first thing, moving from compliance to competitive signaling. So the second shift I'd like us to consider as marketers is, those are the examples I gave, the issues of global gap and everything. So the second one is how you move from market access to market identity. A lot of times we treat these trade agreements I've talked about as access tools. I have an agreement, I'll access the market. But having access alone does not enable a company to scale. It might reduce the tariffs, it can even simplify how you enter the country in some cases, but it doesn't automatically create emotional relevance. A lot of the time, much as I'm accessing a foreign market and I'm a Kenyan company, I have to start moving to create emotional relevance in that market. So operational access is structural. So accessing is structural, I go into the market, but brand identity is very emotional. So if you're expanding regionally, you have to think about that, because you can't expand into the region and position yourself only as a national brand. Because what that does, it limits you to that country where you come from. So as you scale into the region, what you need to be looking at is how you reposition your narrative so that you start to resonate with those markets. So an example I can give is like Bidco. When it became very interested in growing its footprint in the regional market, if you noticed, it changed its name to Bidco Africa. So all of you, whether you're in Tanzania, Nigeria, you feel like you're part of that brand because it's talking about Africa. If a bank, for example, goes into the region, and I was listening to an example of a bank, I won't name them here because they didn't give me the right, but they say they entered a market. And in that market, it was actually Tanzania. They went and they were called, we'll say the Phyllis Bank, because I'm going to own a bank. So like Phyllis Bank, and in that market they were called Phyllis Bank Kenya. And this is in the Tanzanian market. So over time, when they started doing market research, they realized the fact that they are limiting their name to Kenya was limiting how accepted they were emotionally in that market. So they changed their name to Phyllis Bank Tanzania, and it just scaled. So that's why it's important to build that market identity when we enter new markets. So that way you're designing brands that they exist across markets and they help you get access and emotionally connect with people in those markets. Then the third shift I'll talk about. Yeah, so those are some of the things you would consider. Whether your brand is traveling culturally, if your positioning is adaptable within the region, and are you thinking about Pan-African or domestic first? So if you're keen to have a Pan-African market, those are some of the shifts. So the third shift for us marketers is how we move from policy signals to innovation leadership. So a lot of the times, firms react to regulation. We are sitting, then we see the news has said, oh my God, now my product can't enter the market, or my service can't enter, because now they've said everyone whose label says this cannot enter anymore. But that's not what we need as marketers today in this day and age. For us to be strategic, we need to be able to read regulation as a directional signal. Because where policy comes from is actually where consumer expectations are heading. When you see the country putting sustainability regulations, there have been people who are raising their environmental consciousness. So if you watch for signals, people start saying, why are people throwing those plastic papers along the road? Now these plastic papers are blocking our rivers. They're already giving you signals. And then what happens? One day we wake up and we say, there's a plastic ban. It didn't come out of nowhere. There was actually signals. If you see, for example, data protection laws, they are signaling the rising privacy awareness. Before you would forward messages to people and no one would even care. Today you forward messages to people, data commissioners, find how many people this week. I saw like 4 people have been fined, or businesses. And then things like local content rules, when you see countries start to say, oh, now we want to have local content rules, we want buy Kenya, build Kenya, that becomes a policy signal on economic nationalism. So as a brand, you start thinking, how do you then position in that way? So if you're able to read the signs and innovate early, what you're able to do is own the narrative. You can shape consumer perception. You can also avoid reactive cost spikes. Because when it's reactive, the price gets even higher. I remember, for example, when plastics were banned and we had to find new packaging in a week, the people who made packaging made money. Because now it was packaging at any cost. So don't be the one caught up at that side, because by the time you're catching up, it's then too late. So just to say that policy is not bureaucratic noise, it's actually early market intelligence. So read and look out for policy signals as early market intelligence. That way you're starting to shift from regulatory reaction and you're moving to regulatory anticipation and you're becoming more innovative. So I hope that's something we can see more of. So those are some of the things like biodegradable I spoke about, preparing for agent banking years before it happens, a place like Netflix pivoting to local content regulations before they were actually required to. So those are some of the things that just demonstrate how you can do it as marketers. Then the next one that I'll talk about is from trade data to strategic market intelligence. How do we use trade data for strategic market intelligence? So as marketers, we rely heavily on consumer surveys, we look at our sales dashboards, we look at our brand trackers, but what those tools do, they measure demand after it happens or after it appears. But if you follow trade data, it can actually reveal to us structural demand before it even becomes visible at the retail floor. So for example, if imports are surging into your country, that's a signal of competitive pressure. So if you're following your products and you're seeing there's a lot of imports in the same product line, you know that the competition is going to be tough and you have to start differentiating yourself in the market. You have to reconsider your pricing, you have to reconsider your route to market and things like that. If you're looking at, say, for example, exports are growing, you're seeing that exports to Tanzania in these products are growing, it shows you that there's demand growing in that market. So you start thinking, can we consider expanding into a market like that? So that's the thing about trade data. It's actually going to help us to think before things happen. So that's something I want us to do as marketers. How do we utilize trade data more? If, for example, you see tariff reductions, if suddenly you see the finance bill is read in June or July when it's read, and there are reductions in taxes, that's a signal. It's saying probably there might be opportunity for you to grow your product lines more. If you're seeing supply chain rules are starting to tighten, it means you need to look at your margins and how you also ensure that your costs don't go out of hand and your products become uncompetitive. So yeah, just challenging us that can we use trade data in addition to our marketing data so that we contextualize what is happening in the macro environment to make better decisions. Then the last shift I'll speak about, I am almost done, is how we can move as marketers from being policy observers to ecosystem partners. Sometimes we treat regulations as something that happens to us. We woke up and it happened. But companies that are able to scale, they often shape how that regulation evolves over time. So that's why you'll see a lot of people are involved in platforms like East African Business Council, the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, the Chambers of Commerce, because what that does for them, they are able to shape the direction of policy. And that's important because that way you start moving from being an observer to an ecosystem partner, shaping the direction of trade policy where you operate. So I'm sure that Safaricom didn't wake up and just find mobile money rules. It got involved in their development. And a lot of times I've recognized that business has more information than government, and they're willing to listen to business because you're speaking from facts. You're actually the one wearing the shoe. So you're trying to then influence and ensure that they're developed with that in mind. So for firms, if you're able to engage early, what you do is you get regulatory goodwill, you have early visibility, you can position yourself strategically, and you even have institutional legitimacy. So a lot of the companies that are involved in those rooms benefit from that. And you're able to integrate your markets, your ecosystem influence, and actually have a competitive advantage as a firm. So that way, I want to encourage us also that we move from being passive observers to ecosystem participants. And as marketing, we lead that charge. We start telling our regulatory teams or our policy teams, where can we be an ecosystem partner? Where are the trends? Or how do we get involved in this conversation and advocate for it to happen positively for everyone involved in the sector? So those are the 5 strategic shifts that I'll recommend. And now I'll move a little bit into the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, because I'm talking about trade policy, and currently for me that's the hottest trade policy issue for all of us in the continent. So what's the AFCFTA? Okay, yeah, so the AFCFTA is an agreement that is going to lead to a lot of market consolidation. It has 54 African member countries participating, and it's actually the largest free trade area in the world by number of states. The combined market of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is about 1.3 billion people with a total GDP of about $3.4 trillion. There's always a conversation about those 1.3 million people, do they actually have the purchasing power to where it needs to be? But I think it's a journey, but the reality is it's a market. And then currently, just to contextualize it further, intra-Africa trade is at about 15 to 18%. We trade amongst ourselves at that level. It used to be 12% about 3 or 4 years ago. So it's growing slowly. And that's compared to places like Europe, where the trade is at about 70%. So they're really trading goods and services amongst themselves. So what the AfCFTA is going to do, it aims to eliminate tariffs for 90% of goods over time so that they lower cross-border trade costs. And then it also has protocols for service liberalization in some of the key sectors like financial services, telco, transport, and professional services. And from the estimates that have been given is that the AfCFTA, according to World Bank, could actually increase Africa's income by 7% by 2035 and lift 30 million people out of extreme poverty. So for me, the AfCFTA is not just an agreement, it's really a big shift for the continent because we are moving from our fragmented national markets to a more coordinated continental marketplace. We are also reconfiguring the Africa value chains because we'll be able to get product from one country, process it in one country, package it in one country, and that accumulation can then have origin rules or be recognized as a product made in that country. It's also looking to harmonize goods and services trade and is a platform for regional industrialization and digital integration. So what it will do for goods, tariffs will reduce, as I've said, and you'll be able to source more competitively within the continent. And then for services, it will liberalize protocols like the financial services, telco, transport, and professional services. So it basically means that if you're operating, you can operate regionally with fewer structures and barriers, and you can integrate your infrastructure within the region. You can scale even digital platforms regionally. So for marketers, I want to challenge us that changes the conversation from how do we export our products to more, how do we design brands that can scale continentally over the next 10 to 20 years. So as we're thinking of our brands, I encourage us to think, how do we build something that can scale into that market? Because it's going to be a big, big opportunity for all of us. I know everyone says, this AfCFTA, people have talked about it, it's not even happening. The thing is, it's moving slowly, but it will get there. So you don't want to be caught flat-footed at the end. So you want to capture your trust early. You already want people to know you as a Pan-African brand. You want to build that cross-border equity, start finding partners across borders. You want to be a category leader. So I think it's something that as we think in our boardrooms as marketers, that we can start having conversations about. If we are not, we probably are, because it's a long-term brand positioning opportunity. So that I challenge us that is something I think important and a strategic question that we need to consider. So I'm on my last slide, thankfully. And I just want to close with, what should we do as marketers? What does all the little information I have given this evening mean to us as marketers? And I'll cover that. So the first thing is that we need to map our trade exposure. Many companies map consumer segments in detail. We are very clear about that. But we don't necessarily map our tariff exposure. Where do we think a tariff could come tomorrow from and affect our market entry? Our regulatory risk in marketing, we rarely sit to talk about that. Our market access dependencies, our sustainability-linked cost shifts. Where will we have to spend more money so that we are viewed as a sustainable and responsible company? And if policy can move your margins, I think it deserves a place in your planning cycle. So we continuously need to have those conversations and reflections about our trade exposure in our marketing departments. Then the second one is that we build a policy radar. Regulations should not arrive for us as a surprise memo. We just saw it in the news. No. We have to see how we sit closer to our compliance teams, our regulatory teams, our trade teams, because if you're able to have those conversations and be aware of what's happening, it can give you a signal. And that way, as a marketer, you can have the first mover advantage, you can have pricing foresight, you can also position yourself flexibly to respond to what is happening. Then the third thing is how we can convert compliance into competitive messaging. So as I said, compliance is strategic today. It is a brand asset. So let's not hide it somewhere in a footnote. No, it's something that we have to speak intentionally about. You want to say that you meet international standards. You want to say that you operate under harmonized regional frameworks that demonstrate that you comply with what is required regionally. You want to talk about your supply chain meeting the global sustainability benchmark. Because as I said, it's a brand asset and it actually is currency. That credibility is currency for you and your brand. Then the fourth one, as we think about AFCFTA, is to encourage us to design Africa-ready positioning. If we are thinking of going into the African market, but I encourage all of us to, because we can't miss out on that opportunity. So I want us to not just ask, can we export, but really ask ourselves, how do we build a brand that resonates in Accra, in Kigali, in Akwa Ibom, somewhere in the middle of Nigeria? How do we do that? Because what that does, it basically rewards the brands who are able to be regionally coherent. So you don't have to be nationally constrained. So let's see how we design for regional positioning. Then the next one is breaking the silos around trade policy. As I've said, trade policy sits in one room, and it's normally a confidential, serious room and a drawer somewhere. Compliance is in another one. And then marketing is still expected to deliver growth without having visibility on those things. So I think one of the things we need to do, if we've not started doing it, some companies have definitely, is looking at how we break the silos. Look at how we can ensure that we are having this information available to marketers, because when the silos exist, what happens is tariffs change, your pricing reacts late in the market. You've already been overtaken. You see a shift in digital rules, your expansion slows because you have to now start thinking, how do I comply with those rules and become compliant to get back into the market? You also have situations where sustainability standards have changed and you're not ready with a narrative to position your business to respond to that. So I think to avoid marketing becoming reactive instead of anticipating, it's important that we break those silos so that these conversations are had across marketing, the trade policy teams, the regulation teams, because that way then marketing is not the last to know, because it's then too late or you're being reactive. We're being reactive. So it's important that we track all that. Yeah. So in conclusion, I want to say that trade policy shapes where you grow your business, how you price your business, how you source, how you build your trust, and how you scale. And when you ignore it, it's not neutral. It's actually a strategic blind spot for you as a marketer. So I think for us, one of the things I want to say is that we will win if we try and apply some of those proposals that I have made, because trade policy is actually competitive architecture, and it belongs not only in the boardroom, it belongs in the war room, the strategy room, and the C-suite. And for me, as I end, I think it belongs squarely in the marketing department. So thank you very much, and I look forward to interacting with you after this. Asante.
Touchdown, also, baby. Let's go.